Okay, thanks for coming. First I'd say the Greens are really pleased with the result we got. When we started, we wrote 4 goals into our campaign plan. First was to retain our ballot line. That took 50,000 votes. We got more than triple that. The second was, we thought was within our reach, was to get 5% of the vote. And we did that. The polls show we might do much better, but I think there was last minute lesser evil voting. But 5% we thought would get us a permanent place in the political structure of New York State, because we're the only other party beside the Democrats and Republicans that has a ballot line for running our own candidate. And 5% shows significant support. Green votes are very conscious votes. The 2 major parties can count on a party line vote that is pretty much automatic, habitual voters, hereditary voters. Our voters are people that really made a conscious vote for a new direction. The third goal was to move the debate on issues. And I think as we did in 2010, we moved it within the movements. It probably would have taken double digits to get put pause in the plans that Cuomo and his Republican allies in the Senate have for the state going forward. And the fourth goal was to build a Green Party organization. And I think we had the potential to do that. We got enormous interest around the state in terms of groups wanting to form local groups of the Green Party. And our task now is to follow up. So the big takeaway for us is not only our 5% vote, but that the people that quote unquote won the election are the people that didn't vote. 7 million eligible voters, including 1 million voters who last time voted for Cuomo and the Democrats and this time stayed home. And we see that as the future of the Green Party. If we're going to build an electoral majority, those are the people we need to work with. They're mostly hourly workers, working class people who are just totally disgusted. They feel disempowered, hopeless that anything can change. They think the politicians are going to do what they're going to do, and they really can't have any say in it. And our task is to get them engaged and give them the sense of empowerment and participation and sense that they can make a difference by being involved. So I think our 5% vote, it's the largest vote for an independent left candidacy in New York history, except for 2 Socialist Party candidates in 1918 and 1920, who got 5.6 and 5.7% in those 2 years respectively. And that Socialist Party also elected 6 members of the Assembly, which were not seated. And then they had a special election, they got reelected, and the Assembly sat one of them, but that Socialist wouldn't sit until the other 6 were seated. And that was sort of the peak of their influence. It was during World War I, which was a big issue. Some have noted that Franklin Roosevelt Jr. got 8% in 1966 running as a liberal. But we think that's a different kind of campaign. It was like Teachout's campaign if the working families had run her instead of Cuomo. It was a fight within the Democratic Party, and his intention was to win the Democratic nomination 4 years later. So they really weren't trying to build an independent left. So we think that ought to count for something, the second best showing ever for an independent left. And the other thing to note is that, you know, we got about the same vote that Teachout and Wu got in the primary. And looking at the results, you know, our gubernatorial ticket got about double the vote of our candidates for comptroller and and attorney general, which I take to mean that about half of our vote is a core independent left vote, about 100,000 strong. And then the rest of that were disgruntled Democrats. But the thing that's, I think, noteworthy is that the working families vote was only 20% down, with a 30% down, lower turnout, which means they pretty much maintained their support. And it looks to us like most of those Teachout voters went back to the Democratic fold if they voted at all, via the Working Families Party or another line. And we still think it's kind of silly that they could protest the Cuomo agenda by voting for Cuomo, on another line. It just doesn't make sense. The result was, if those people had voted Green, we would have got row C, and Cuomo would have had a plurality. It would have been demoralizing, would have put pause in his agenda, but he did get a majority mandate. And people voted for him who didn't really like him, on another line, and I think, they need to think about what they've done, because they've strengthened Cuomo's hand as we go forward. Some people have said the significant green vote that we got and some of our candidates like Matt Funicello in 21st District means that the Democratic vote will be split going forward and we're going to help elect Republicans. And I think that misreads what happened. We expand the electorate. Our core vote are people that wouldn't be voting otherwise. And as I think the results show, most of the Democrats went back to the Democratic fold in one way or another after the primary, where there was a lot of dissent from the Cuomo agenda. So our task going forward is to go back to the people that supported us, have expressed interest in forming Green Party locals, and work with them to get organized. I plan to spend a lot of time in the coming months doing that. And then we need to keep speaking out on the issues, because I think what we call the Green New Deal for New York reflects demands and values that this non-voting majority, it reflects their interests. And so I think the $15 minimum wage is one issue that really got a lot of traction. We just could tell that on the stump, or just wearing a $15 an hour button and, going to the grocery store, and the clerk will look around, make sure the supervisor wasn't looking, and say, I really like your button, can I get one? And that would raise the wages for about 40% of New York hourly workers. So, and those people aren't voting, because I think right now they don't see either party speaking to their, their basic needs. Fracking will remain a huge issue. It seems to us Cuomo signaled that he's going to go ahead with fracking when he said in the debate that suddenly that health impact analysis that we've been waiting for is going to appear before the first of the year. And you put that together with his administration's draft energy plan, all the infrastructure being built. I understand there's a PSC hearing today about converting 2 coal-fired plants to gas-fired, which the utilities don't even want. It's going to raise ratepayers' rates, but that's what Cuomo wants. So it's all about gas, and so that's going to be a big fight going forward. Single-payer health care, there'll be hearings. We have a majority of members of the Assembly that support it, at least on paper. We really want to push for a vote and get them on record. And we plan to run candidates on those 2 issues, the ban for fracking and the single-payer health bill, in 2016. And we're going to hold accountable the Democrats if they don't get a vote from their leadership. If they don't put it up for a vote, we're going to basically assume that they're not for it. We've seen that around the country. Example, California. The Democrats had both houses, and when Schwarzenegger, the Republican, was governor, they passed single-payer twice, and he vetoed it. Now they got both houses and a Democratic governor, Brown, and they don't pass it. So we're going to be holding the Democrats accountable for what they say on paper. We're going to be trying to develop model legislation for 100% green energy by 2030, and seeing if we can get some legislators to put that in the hopper and begin to make that an issue of debate. Because right now the draft energy plan assumes a reduction of 80% carbon by 2050, and you do a global carbon budget analysis and then assign to each country their per capita share, and that does not reduce carbon enough to keep us below 2-degree rise in Celsius. So this is an emergency situation with global warming, and we want to see a serious program to address it. And probably 2 of the biggest battles going forward, Cuomo put on he threw down the gauntlet right before the election. He went to the Daily News and said he's going to, quote, break the last remaining public monopoly, meaning public schools and the teachers. And his program is promoting more charters, tuition tax credits for private school tuition, and he said he wants to do a new round of teacher evaluations, which means he's going to war with the teachers union. He's got this 2-year moratorium on the high-stakes testing being used for evaluations, but doesn't seem like he wants that to stick. And we see him being aligned with his colleagues in the Senate, in the Republican side, pushing that agenda. So that'll be a big fight. The other thing he said was, we're going to lower the property taxes by getting local governments to cut spending, while he keeps revenue sharing flat. And earlier, his budget director said the state budget going forward, he told the agency directors, don't ask for increases. So what that means is more cuts in spending and services at the local level. And, you know, we're already cut to the bone. I just know my own city, we've closed a fire station, a senior center. We had 300 water main breaks in the first 6 months of the year. We lost a quarter of our teachers. I mean, how much more are we supposed to cut? So it's, you know, more bipartisan austerity budgets, and we're gonna keep raising the banner of progressive tax reform and revenue sharing. And then finally, you know, people asked me, you know, what are my plans? And I was either misunderstood or misspoke on a telephone conference call we did with the media. And some people reported that I'm not gonna run again. What I was trying to say is it's up to the Green Party, you know, what I do. I'm willing to play any role, including being a candidate. But I'm just as happy being a campaign manager or just, you know, a rank and file organizer. I think, you know, we'll have to look at upcoming elections and make those determinations in the future. So, you know, the bottom line is we're gonna be following up in the coming months, organizing the people that express interest in the Green Party and speaking out on the issues that are coming up in this next legislative session, and also at the local level, because 2015 are local elections and we'll be having candidates in those races. So that's where we're headed. Any questions?
Can you talk a little bit about moving forward with more of a party structure, being higher on the ballot, the party's ability to get candidates elected to the Assembly and the Senate? You know, obviously you have been a statewide candidate and have been, you know, much more visible, but in terms of getting those candidates who maybe we didn't hear about this time around elected to those positions?
Well, as I said earlier, we're gonna have to go out and work with and organize and engage the people that aren't voting to build a majority. I think in a lot of districts, because of gerrymandering, they're one-party districts, and the other major party, that's the minor party, doesn't run serious candidates or doesn't run any candidate at all. 1/3 of our state legislative candidates were unopposed. So we're gonna target those races and try to build a majority. And, you know, like I mentioned in the debate, you know, the 6 state senators adjacent to Syracuse had no opposition. And I live in a district where we have a IDC Democrat who the Republicans seem to like because he works with the Republicans, and the Democrats seem to like because he's got the Democratic label on him. We almost ran somebody in that race this time. And looking at the election results, we did, you know, good in the city of Syracuse and surprisingly well in Madison County, which is the rest of the district, where we haven't had organization, but we have had people call us about getting that county organized. So the other thing we're gonna do is run candidates in local races where you have a similar problem, on lack of opposition in a lot of races. Last year in the mayoral races in the big cities, in Syracuse, Rochester, and Albany, there was no Republican opponent, there was a Green opponent. So we think we can build upon that. We think at the least we can be the second party in a lot of these districts. Down in New York City, it's a 6-to-1 enrollment advantage for the Democrats, and the Republicans are not serious opposition in most of those districts. We think we can be that opposition, and the Democrats will be the establishment and we'll be the progressive alternative. So there are probably a few race districts where we can, you know, be competitive, and others will be, you know, building. But that's our goal. I mean, we're not out here just to, you know, issue press releases, raise some issues, and then go home. We're trying to get people elected. We do have some village mayors and town board members and school board members. I got 48% one year running for city council in Syracuse. So, you know, I think we're on the verge of more of those victories. And that, you know, I think will be a big psychological hurdle for us to overcome, because then people will see that we can get elected to those kinds of races. I think part of the difficulty we have is people like what we say, but then they say, and I heard this, you know, right up to the election, people were saying, geez, I'd really like to vote for you, but I'm afraid of the Republicans. And they had no idea that Cuomo was, you know, more than 20 points ahead in the polls, because people don't follow it that closely. They just have this gut feeling that if they're, you know, liberal to progressive, that the Republicans are the last thing they want, and they may not like the Democrats, but they better vote for them to stop the Republicans. We start electing people, and then I think the psychology changes. So that's something we're going to look at very closely and really look at some races we can win.
Do you think there's any region of the state that you can be particularly competitive in, whether it's upstate or downstate, or, you know, Western New York versus Central New York, or something like that?
I think in all the regions except maybe the suburbs of New York, Long Island and you know, Westchester, and maybe some of the outer ring suburbs like in Syracuse and Rochester and Buffalo. I think we can be certainly a serious opposition and potentially competitive. As we look around, I think it depends a lot on our local organization and the particulars of particular races. So we're looking all over the state.
Is there a next Howie Hawkins out there? You talked about in 4 years, you know, who's gonna run for the Green Party, and maybe you or maybe someone else. Is there someone in the hierarchy that can replace you think, or is there someone that could possibly emerge? What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's quite possible somebody could emerge. Brian Jones, who was our lieutenant governor candidate, had never run for office. You know, we knew him as an activist, but he didn't run for school board or city council. We ran him for lieutenant governor. He did a great job. One of the things we want to build upon is our relationship to groups that are not ready to break with the Democrats and be Green Party supporters or members, but who we agree with on the issues. You know, 6 local teachers unions, the progressive Democratic clubs down in the city. We certainly want to continue working with them on the issues coming up before the legislature, and you know, just see what we can do going forward. And there'll be races maybe again where they will want to go outside their party. This was for those clubs down in the city, this was the first time for them. And you know, we'd like to have a relationship where there'll be other circumstances where they decide to support us rather than the Democrats. So, you know, a lot of our support is my guess is half of it were, people committed to independent politics, and the other half were progressives not happy with Cuomo. Those people we want to continue working with and have a relationship, and we'll see how, where things go over time.
You have a strong support in central New York, obviously that's where you're from. Is it important, if you don't choose to run in 4 years, to maybe have someone from, I don't know, Western New York or maybe Albany, to maybe kind of expand, the good base that you have where you are right now?
Well, one of the encouraging things about the results is we really went up big in Manhattan and Brooklyn. And I think those progressives are just dissatisfied with the Democratic Party. So I think we, expanded, in 2010 we got 50,000 of the 60,000 votes we got north of Westchester County. I haven't done the numbers this time, but that big jump in Manhattan and Brooklyn, and also even Long Island and Staten Island, Bronx, Queens, we were 2 or 3 times or more up in our vote from where we were in 2010. So we've got people there paying attention and want to start organizing. So I wouldn't rule out any question. I think, upstate, we of course want to build on the base we have. I think one of the reasons we have a strong base in central New York is we've been a consistent presence for a couple of decades and have just gradually climbed. I started at 3% for city council and got as high as 48%. And I think, voters respect that you're consistent and you're out there, and they know that who you are, and they begin to trust what you're saying.
I looked at some of the elections data, and forgive me if my math is wrong, but I believe I counted 11 counties upstate where Rob Astorino won, but it was by a margin that, if your percentage went to Cuomo, he would have won those counties. I mean, you were talking earlier about Greens who say, I want to vote for you, but I'm afraid that the Republican's going to win if I do that. I mean, does that illustrate their fear, or does that illustrate, I guess, progressive disenfranchisement with the Democrats, and does that elevate, the Green Party's been kind of viewed as a spoiler in some places, a spoiler in the 21st, they were supposed to be, and it turns out they weren't, but, does that elevate that view of the Green Party as well?
Well, I've already heard, Democratic consultants, touting that. I heard it on Liz Benjamin's program. I'm out of time, I'm not sure what day it was, but Bruce Georgi, I think his name is? Yeah. Yeah, he made that the first point he made talking about the elections. Watch out for the Greens. As I said earlier, our vote expands the electorate. In the governor's race, I think, half our vote expanded the electorate. These are people that wouldn't vote for Democrats, they just stay home. The other half were just voting Democrats, but I don't think that affected the other races so much. Democrats had a choice in the 21st district. I think Matt's 11% is a 11% for the Greens. These people want an alternative. So I don't think you can say that our vote would have gone to the Democrats. A lot of our vote would have stayed home. And so that's why we see our future as, really getting rooted in these working class communities that have just dropped out of politics because they don't think it can make any difference. And that's where, if there's going to be the Greens being, contesting for power statewide or in particular districts, that's where our vote's going to come from. That doesn't mean we want to stop talking to the more middle-class folks that tend to think more about voting strategic. I mean, I've just noticed in Syracuse, take Ursula Rosam's run for Congress 2 years ago. Here's another example of that. The only time Dan Maffei has won in our district is when a Green was in the race. And I think that's because we bring the issues rather than, we bring a positive program forward, which changes the dynamic. It kind of puts the Democrat in the middle, and from marketing that, whether you're selling cars or coffee, if you want to sell that big one that's called big, you create a bigger one, and then that's the medium, and more people will buy that. I think that dynamic comes into play, and I think we change the tenor of the debate from very negative campaigning to, what are you going to do for us? Which I think, in Maffei's case, the analysis there is this time he went so negative that it blew up on him. People just reacted to that. And then you look at who voted for Ursula Rosam. This was a case where the third-party polling had her peaking at 6% right before the election. She got 8%. And we went back and looked at the election districts and found that the Green vote went down in the salaried middle-class election districts around Syracuse University, for example. They were more worried about the lesser evil problem. But in the blue-collar, working-class districts and around the city of Syracuse, city of Auburn, up in Oswego County, which is basically, service workers and factory workers, she got in double digits. And, and I just get the sense from when I petition or just door knock that, the working class voters just say, is this person with us or against us? And if they're with us, you're not going to worry about strategic voting. You're going to vote for somebody they believe in. Another example of that is, after the Nader situation in 2000, you go to the university neighborhood and, they say you're responsible for the war in Iraq, like your Bush and blah, blah, blah. And you go in the working class districts and they say, yeah, Ralph Nader, he's for the people, I'll sign a petition. So I think that's another factor you got to think about when looking at the spoiler problem. The voters we're trying to recruit and getting involved are going to be, be voting for us. And they won't be worrying about voting against the Republicans by voting for a Democrat so much.
How was your reaction to Dan Maffei losing in the 24th district there? By a decent amount. Were you surprised? And what's your reaction? I guess people are kind of souring on him because he hasn't made himself available after the loss, which I guess he did in 2010 as well.
Yeah, he was not always very available anyway. I know when Ursula was running, the incumbent Republican said, let's have some town hall meetings, and was willing to negotiate the terms, and he wouldn't participate. He just said it was a setup, even though she was open to how it would be organized. And Ursula went, and I think that hurt him in that race. But in that race, he won by I think 8 points, and Ursula got 8, and so the right was isolated in that dynamic. In this race, I think it was the negativity. The Republicans, and a lot of this came from the national Republicans. They just focused on the question of choice and how, and then they overstated it. They said Katko was against contraception, which he was able to point out he wasn't, and people began to just react to that. And I think the other thing is, Maffei is a corporate centrist. He, doesn't hit the economic class issues hard. He tries to tout how he voted with the Republicans here and there, and when he is in public, it tends to be with businesses. Labor puts them out there because they're afraid of the Republicans, but he gives Labor Day speeches every election, and it doesn't sound like a labor movement kind of speech. So I think he lost, the working class, and they just stayed home. The turnout was very low again.
What kind of support did you get out in the Watkins Glen area where there's this huge controversy about the gas storage and people are getting arrested and all the rest of it? And I just heard today that the judge who was going to take the case of the 15 who were recently arrested had to recuse himself because he was working for the Crestwood. I mean,
Yeah, well, a lot of these projects, the local power structures, I mean, I go into Republican towns and the Republicans are complaining to me about the local click and charge. And it's usually the developers, the real estate people, the bankers, the lawyers, you know, all the people who are in on the deals. It sounds like the city of Syracuse. I mean, the Democrats do it in the cities and the Republicans do it in the suburbs. Those folks out there, we had a lot of support. And in the anti-fracking movement, it was split a lot like, you know, the way I see the teach-out vote. You know, some came to us, but a lot, you know, voted for the Democrats on another line. And so that's just the reality. That's the terrain that we're in. You know, I don't expect the Working Families Party to go away, even if they hadn't got the ballot line back. You know, if it wasn't the Working Family Party, it would be a newer version. We've had that since the American Labor Party, the Liberals, now the Working Families. It's really a faction of the Democratic Party. And a lot of people who are active on these movements still hold out hope that through the Democrats they'll be able to get a sane energy policy that isn't, you know, for example, storing gas and propane and butane in salt caverns by Seneca Lake, which, you know, most of the community doesn't want. It's not just the environmentalists, it's the people that own the vineyards and the farms, and basically everybody that's not directly connected to the business of making money off that project. But I think they're split between, you know, people that are ready for an independent alternative and those that, you know, are still trying to get reform through the Democratic Party. And, you know, going forward, I think, you know, it'll be interesting to see how they react to Cuomo's going ahead with fracking, which I'll be astounded if he doesn't. I think his trial balloon 2 years ago is what we're going to see. You know, we won't do it in the Syracuse or New York watersheds, but then it's local option, as the courts have said. You can zone it out if you want, so it'll be kind of a guerrilla warfare. So we'll be fighting that in local elections. And like I said, we want to really push for a vote on the ban. There was a ban bill. They ended up voting for a moratorium in the Assembly, which is a safe vote. And we want to hold them accountable. If the vote doesn't come up, we're going to hold them all accountable for that. They've got to get their leadership to, you know, force the issue and go on record so that when we come to the next election, we know where people stand. On the fracking issue this time, we really don't know where most of them stood because they really didn't have to vote on the question of banning fracking. And we also need, as I said earlier, to get some kind of legislation that would push the question of 100% green energy. And, you know, I think, you know, we're talking about developing at least a conceptual model legislation. We don't have access to the lawyers and, you know, the state legislature would put it into, you know, legal language and reference it to all the existing laws. But I think we can put out a conceptual model and see if there are any takers of people who are in office, and if not, you know, run on that in 2016. Yeah.
Recently, the Long Island Power Authority has signaled their intent to build a wind farm 30 miles off the coast of Montauk. Would a similar project in, say, Lake Ontario, Lake Erie benefit, in your eyes, Western New York?
There's been discussion of that, and there's been some opposition because in the case of Lake Erie, it was within sight of the shore, and so the tourism industry was concerned. We do need some big wind farms, and off shore, off New England, over the horizon, there's some good locations, and so we want to see those go forward. But there's enormous potential for micro wind, the kind of wind you can put up by a home, you know, not the big windmills, but the
Smaller
cylindrical.
units. The smaller units.
Yes,
Yeah, I know what you're
yes,
talking about.
and the cost of those going down. If we scale up, they're going to go down further because of economies of scale and mass production. New York City has enormous potential because of all the natural wind tunnels, particularly in Manhattan, and now Brooklyn as it gets higher. So that requires a smart grid. And that's another issue that, I don't know if it'll be on the front pages, but this reforming the energy vision proposal that's now being put forward and the PSC starting to look at. We have a big issue with it because it hands over to the utilities how to implement it. And they like centralized plants, you know, big wind farms as opposed to the micro wind, because then they get more revenue. When you have distributed energy, micro wind, solar panels, and net metering, their model goes out of business. I mean, you really got to then go to public power for the distribution and transmission and the central power plants. And then there's still lots of scope for, you know, small businesses to do the manufacturing, the installation, the maintenance. So that's another policy discussion that it may not have the big demos like fracking, but it's going to be something that Greens will be involved in, and there are a lot of environmental groups that are concerned with that. So that's another part of politics, you know, formulating the issues. I mean, we got a lot of issues we want to. We're not in a position with this Republican Senate to win a lot of progressive demands. It's just not going to happen. But we can put some markers down as to what the answers are. Is it going to be $10.10 for a minimum wage like the Democrats called for, or is it going to be 15 like we called for? 15, you get a living wage. 10 still a poverty wage. So that's one issue that we will be debating on the center to left side. Another issue like that is public campaign financing. A lot of these little groups used to support full public campaign financing called clean money elections. Once you qualify, every candidate who qualifies gets an equal grant, and there's a series of debates they have to participate in. What they've settled on is what New York settled on, and that is a matching fund system. And actually the state burden is worse than New York's because it's an unlimited amount of private money next to a limited amount of public money. So it kind of, the little bit of public money kind of covers the old system with a, you know, kind of a new wrapper, but it really doesn't change things. And, you know, for example, Sal Albanese, who endorsed me, I called him up, you know, I heard he was interested, and yeah, I met him when he was driving Teach Out, or was with her when we went to the Public Employee Federation. And so Sal said, you know, what I really like is you're calling for full public campaign financing. And he talked about how he had introduced it into the New York City Council back in the early 90s. And they settled on matching funds. And even with the limit there, the private money is limited at the same level as public money. But he says the real estate industry still drives New York politics because they don't have a full public campaign finance system. So I think that's another issue where, you know, I would like to get him. I know Republicans in Maine where they have a full public campaign financing system that would testify if they were going to do hearings on it. We want to approach their sponsors of a bill for full public campaign financing, see if they're serious. I want to talk to Bob Antonacci, the Republican comptroller candidate, who tried but failed to qualify under this experimental program. And I did run into him a couple times on the campaign, and he affirmed what I had said in a memo I wrote on this whole debate last year, is that the thresholds are too high. Even a major party candidate couldn't qualify. And in the governor's race, I would have had to have got at least 6,000 contributions and raised $650,000.
To be able to qualify for that public finance.
Yes, yes, and the bill that the Assembly passed that Cuomo supports. And that's just too high. I doubt Cuomo, I'm pretty sure he didn't even qualify with all the money he raised, because 99+% of his contributions were over $1,000. They wouldn't have qualified for matching funds. You know, he had the money to go out and try to qualify, but I forget what the maximum is in the bill, but it was a lot less than the $45 million or whatever he raised. So that's another issue where, you know, it may not move in the legislature, but we want to move it within the movement and, you know, challenge what some of these groups have settled for. And the financing behind the Fair Elections for New York Coalition, it's Jonathan Soros, it's David Rockefeller, it's the Committee for Economic Development, which is a, you know, Fortune 500 lobby group going back to World War II. It's the Facebook boys. You know, it's very wealthy people, and you have to wonder if this is just sort of their way of sort of getting the question of our election financing behind them, so they can continue, you know, buying politicians.
Well, if there are no more questions, thank you for coming, and we'll be back.